Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Sir Hunt on X on the 17th of September 2025. As I come to you live from Cincinnati, Ohio, in the United States of America. And I was hoping everyone had themselves a wonderful day today. Lots to get to tonight. Picking the games for this upcoming week and reliving a night that had unfinished business. So I'm going to go ahead and get right down to it. Here's hoping everyone had themselves a wonderful day. Hopefully this mini heat wave that came through here in Cincinnati can finally go away, because it's sort of crazy that it would be like 89 degrees, like some kind of a Indian summer it perceives over here just out of nowhere in mid-September. But here we are. Hopefully it goes away after the weekend and we finally get fall weather, which means leaves falling down, hoodies, and for myself, suits. So hopefully we get fall weather finally, because the heat wave over here to the hot weather, everybody's had enough, yours truly being one of them. So let's go ahead and get right down to it. It was, of course, coming up week 3. Games starting to get a little easy. I don't say easier to pick, but you see the momentums of the first 2 weeks. Injuries on. So as I move on to this particular week, I do apologize for the technical malfunction. I'm not the greatest fortune teller or the greatest picker, so don't come to me as a specialist for this, because I am not. So I'm going to go ahead and get right down to it. It is week 3 of the NFL season. Let's start with the game tomorrow night. It is Miami at Buffalo. Everything's going well for one team, which is Buffalo. Nothing's going well for the other team, which is Miami. Don't expect that to change. Expect another convincing win for the Bills. I expect them, who has handled Miami rather convincingly on their home field in recent years, to continue it. Josh Allen's shown why he's probably the best quarterback in the NFL at the moment, and I expect that trend to continue. And Miami is just a hot dog and mess, as we all know. And I expect that to continue. Played a little better against New England, but they're going up against a buzzsaw right now who looks like they're going to be the team to beat in the AFC. Granted, it's still 2 weeks into the season. But on this night, give me Buffalo tomorrow night, and I don't think this one's going to be close. Now to the early game slate. The 1 o'clock games for Sunday. Atlanta at Carolina. Neither team really doing much. Atlanta coming off the stunning win in Minnesota. I think the momentum continues. Carolina isn't doing much so far this season. Bryce Young just getting absolutely train wrecked again. No surprise. And I expect that to continue. So go ahead and give me Atlanta on the road. It's a divisional game. It'll be closer than expected. But do give me Atlanta on the road. Cincinnati and Minnesota. We know the story in Cincinnati. Touch on that here in a second after I give my pick. Jake Browning versus Carson Wentz. Who would have thought this would be the matchup we get for this particular game? No Aaron Jones for the Minnesota Vikings, sort of a sizable loss. But again, it's going to come down to whether or not the Bengals offensive line can hold up the vicious defensive front of Minnesota, led by Jonathan Allen and Javon Hargrave, and whether or not the Bengals defense could actually generate pressure on that Minnesota offensive line, who's going to get the Brickshaw back. And that's where the difference is going to be. Minnesota is just going to beat the Bengals up at the line of scrimmage. Bengals sort of got lucky getting off to this 2-0 start, largely because they played the Browns and the Jaguars. I'm going to be on the Jake Browning bandwagon, and I'll be rooting my best as I could for him to pull this one out, and I would love to see it more than anything else. But no way I see Minnesota losing 2 weeks in a row at their home field, even with a backup quarterback and a backup running back, which I believe is going to be Cam Akers again. So give me Minnesota on their home field. Jake Browning is just going to be electric, do what he can. Minnesota, I think, is too physical, and Brian Flores is going to scheme up the defense to is going to make life terrible for Jake Browning. And on that note, it was announced earlier today that Zac Taylor said at the press conference that Joe Burrow hasn't had his surgery yet for his turf toe with torn ligaments, which backs the claim I said all along that I'd be surprised if this guy is not coming back this season. If they're holding back surgery up to this point, pretty much means the guy's not coming back this season. So you might as well just playing the remaining 15 games in Cincinnati with Jake Browning and whoever they have as their backups. Just hope you don't get Jake Browning killed. Because the guy's good enough to do something. We're going to see what he's made of. On to the rest of the schedule. It is Green Bay and Cleveland. Cleveland's defense doing all they can to hang around. One of the better defenses in the league. Myles Garrett's as good as it gets on the defensive front. But they basically have next to nothing on offense. And you're going against a Green Bay defense who's just putting everybody on lockdown right now. And I expect that to continue. Give me Green Bay on the road. And I think this one won't be close at all. I think Jordan Love is going to really go into do everything he can to get himself really going. Give me Green Bay on the road. Cleveland's defense is going to do everything they can to hang around, but they just have no offense, and I think Green Bay is just they're going to stomp the entire league the way they're going right now. By the way, shout outs Robert Hollingsworth and Tim Monk. Long time no see, Tim. Hope you're doing good these days. Down to Houston and Jacksonville. Jacksonville, an odd team. I mean, they look good at demolishing Carolina. Had their moments against Cincinnati, but Trevor Lawrence shows why the guy's not an elite quarterback, especially two of the interceptions were absolutely head scratchers. Lucky they're going against a Houston team that's basically 0-2 and has offering nothing right now. And still the issue in Houston is that offensive line is getting C.J. Stroud killed. Jacksonville's defense, I'll say this. It's fast, and they go after the quarterback. And if Houston's O-line is still going to be that bad, Jacksonville is going to take advantage, and they're going to get to C.J. Stroud, which I think happens in Jacksonville Sunday. Give me Jacksonville at home. I think this one is going to be a little more one-sided than people think. Houston, I'm not saying it's must-win situations for teams this early in the season, but I'll personally acknowledge for Houston as a favorite who's going to win the AFC South. If you don't have any hopes to win that division, you better come up with a W in Jacksonville. Plain and simple. Indiana and Tennessee. Indiana off to the surprisingly good start. A resurrection for Daniel Jones, and I think this one continues. I mean, he came to Indy knowing he could take Anthony Richardson's starting quarterback job and did that, and has basically taken the ball and ran with it. I mean, Indiana hasn't even punted in the first two games, if I recall correctly. That tells you how well Daniel Jones and that Indy offense is playing. And I'll admit, I'll be eating some crow on this one because I thought Indy wasn't going to amount to much this season. But they're going to Tennessee. We know Tennessee is in rebuild mode, and the coach, Brian Callahan, apparently looks like has lost that team. Indy's rolling right now. Indy goes to 3-0. Give me Indy at Tennessee. And probably the game of the early slate, rematch of the divisional round. Pretty darn good one. Rams and Philly, and the Eagles. Sorry, getting used to the Phillies. I still have my baseball mind on. This is about as good as a matchup you're going to get on the early slate. This one is going to come down to whether the Eagles' offense can start to get going a little bit, because their defense has done all the heavy lifting in the first two games for the most part and has done a great job at it. The Eagles' passing offense hasn't got there yet. They're facing a Rams defense who has been absolutely lights out so far in the first two games, especially Byron Young, who's so far the early candidate for Defensive Player of the Year, 3 sacks and a forced fumble. This one, I think, comes down to the wire, not like just like last playoff where it was a classic. I expect the same thing here. Do give me Philly at home. I think Philly's offense finds a way to start to get going here a little bit. But this one is a flip-flop. It can go either way. I think this one's going to be a good doozy. Commanders and the Raiders. Raiders didn't look like much Monday night when they lost to the Chargers. And I expect the Commanders to bounce back after the loss to the Packers on their home field. Basically, it's going to be a cross-country, short week for the Raiders against a Washington team who's basically, granted, Jaden Daniels is not 100%. I mean, he has a knee problem. Who knows? But even then, still give me Washington at home. Short week, cross-country travel. And I think Washington, after laying an egg in Green Bay, bounces back at home. The Jets and the Buccaneers. This one is I don't believe in no-brainers anymore because I really live to see Buster Douglas shock Mike Tyson in the biggest upset. But in the NFL circles, you would call this a no-brainer. But I'll probably put this as my lock. Tampa Bay, 2 fourth-quarter game-winning drives against a Jets team whose defense has offered nothing in the first 2 weeks. I expect that to continue. No fourth quarter game-winning drive needed. Baker Mayfield and the running game of Tampa Bay just pounds the Jets, and they're going to get a decisive win. Justin Fields in the concussion protocol, which means Tyrod Taylor would start. Don't think that's going to matter. Tampa Bay is, rolling right now. I said the other night after Baker Mayfield's game-winning drive in Houston, he's become a top 12 quarterback, and he's been on a tear ever since Cleveland showed him the door. And I expect that to continue this Sunday, and I expect him to handle the Jets quite convincingly. And the Steelers and the Patriots. Steelers is tricky. We never thought I would live to see the day where I would say the Steelers defense is not all that good. But here we are. Week 3, Aaron Rodgers has been hit and miss so far. He's 41 years old. Against the Patriots, who got on the right track this past Sunday when they beat the Dolphins at home. Give me the Patriots at home. I think Drake May, who showed in Miami, he can be as good as anyone when he wants to be. I expect the home crowd to pull him up over this one. This one has the makings of a 35-30 shootout. Give me New England at home. So that takes care of the early slate games. Now we go to the late slate games, which is basically the West Coast games and the so-called big games for the 4 o'clock, the Sunday night, and the Monday night. This a real good one at LA. Broncos and Chargers. Broncos coming off the tough loss to Indy, albeit under some weird and bizarre circumstances, against a Chargers team with a Justin Herbert who's playing pretty darn well right now for his standard. And the Denver Broncos defense has been sort of hit and miss so far in the first 2 weeks. I think it comes better, but it's going to come down to Bo Nix versus Justin Herbert. Who do you take in this? It's still Justin Herbert. He's played pretty darn well. The offense, it looks like they're doing just fine. They go to 3-0. Give me the Chargers at home. This one I think is lower scoring, but again, give me LA at home. The Saints and the Seahawks. Saints are going anywhere. Seahawks got the solid win in Pittsburgh. I think that momentum rolls over this week. Give me San Diego over, the Seahawks over the Saints. And a very darn good one here. Arizona against San Francisco. Arizona off to the 2-0 start. That defense has absolutely been pretty darn good so far for Arizona. Much better game for season so far start-wise for Kyler Murray. Of course, the 49ers starting Mac Jones, who looked very good at beating the Saints, albeit it was the Saints, who are probably going to pick top 5 overall. Pretty darn good divisional matchup in the NFC West, which I think is going to be a very competitive division from top to bottom all season long. But this one is going to come down to being the 49ers home opener. I think San Fran ekes this one out at home, albeit this one is going to be competitive. As I said, the NFC West this season might be the most competitive because there's no real clear-cut favorite who's going to win it. And these two teams will be in it at the end. Arizona's looked good so far, but San Fran being at their home opener takes it. The Cowboys and the Bears. Dallas is this year's what the Bengals were last year. The explosive offense, but brings nothing on defense. And you have the Chicago Bears, who's just basically, after getting up to a good start against the Minnesota Vikings in the first half of that game, and after that Nashon Wright pick 6 of J.J. McCarthy, just fell flat against Minnesota and just laid an egg in Detroit. And the Chicago defense is just absolutely, from since that pick 6, has been shredded by both J.J. McCarthy and Jared Goff. And now you have Dak Prescott going over there with CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens. Give me Dallas on the road. This one I think has the makings of a shootout because neither defense knows how to step up. So give me Dallas on the road. And I said all along, I've never been the biggest Caleb Williams fan. I told this to Chicago countless times, and I'll say it again. You guys should have taken Jaden Daniels over Caleb Williams. You didn't. Look at what Jaden Daniels has done in Washington, and look what's happened to you guys in Chicago because of it. And you guys are going to lose to Dallas on Sunday. The Sunday nighter, of course, is Kansas City and the Giants. Giants aren't going anywhere. I know Kansas is 0-2. They limping into this game. Kansas is going to pretty much win this game in the ugly, muck it up way. You know how, which is how they won games last season. Giants, I think, are just going to be like the Saints, going to be front with the top 5 pick. So people have them going winless. I don't know if I would go that far. It's hard to go winless in this league. But Kansas limps into this game 0-2. They will limp out with a win. And they're going to muck it up and look dirty. And the Chiefs fan base isn't going to be happy about it. And the Monday Nighter is going to be a pretty darn good one. This has the makings of a 51-45 shootout because neither defenses showed up, but both offenses have. It's Detroit versus Baltimore. This game is going to come down to which offense is going to execute the most. Who do you trust more? Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry, or Jared Goff and Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery with that two-headed monster at running back? The receiving cores, I think, are a wash. Tight ends are a wash. But give me Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry on the home field. This one is going to be a shootout. I think both teams surpass the mid-30s. But I think Baltimore's defense does just enough. And the offense of Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry get the job done at home to win this. I think it's going to be a wild game Monday night at Baltimore. And Baltimore is going to win this one at home. And I think this one's going to be the game of the early year so far because neither defense hasn't done much so far this season. Actually, shockingly for Baltimore, we consider the upgrades they've done on their roster. Granted, they look better against Cleveland, but it's Cleveland. We're going to see how much better they can be because they're playing the explosive offense of the Detroit Lions. Of course, 2 seasons ago, Baltimore just slaughtered the Lions 38-6. I don't think it's going to be in that kind of a slaughtering this time, but think Baltimore's going to win at home because Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry have some unfinished business. So that takes care of all of my Week 3 NFL picks. Of course, again, I'm not the fortune teller. I'm not one of those guys with 8-foot-long turbans with a big crystal ball, with a 70-foot-long gray beard with many wrinkles on my face, going predicting that what's going to happen because I'm not the greatest predictor. I'll just give you what I think will happen. I'll probably get half of them wrong. And I'll admit, I'll tell you right now, I'll probably get half of them wrong. But I'm not the one that tells you who's going to do what because I'm not that kind of a fortune teller. I'm not that much of a genius. Now, speaking of unfinished business, it was 31 years ago today in Las Vegas that a rematch that was highly anticipated for the longest time took place, and it took place longer than many thought it should. And actually, yeah, not only it should, but it was probably well past its expiration date when this happened. It was a rematch between Julio Cesar Chavez and Meldrick Taylor. For the fight followers out here, you know what happened St. Patrick's Day 1990. Undefeated versus undefeated. The epic clash both ways. The controversial stoppage that has everyone in the boxing community divided in half. We all know this in the fight game. This rematch was something that should have happened long before it did. I said at the end of 91, after 91, since both guys went their separate ways for whatever reason, the rematch made no sense. Because after the first fight, and we know what happened in the first fight, it was the biggest money fight at that time to be made outside of Evander Holyfield versus Mike Tyson. Because Holyfield-Tyson was a fight everyone wanted to see. Right behind it was a rematch between Chavez and Taylor. Problem was, it was not till 4.5 years later that we got it. People ask why it had took that long, because I've seen a lot of shows, a lot of articles about why it took place that late. It's simple. Well, let's start with the first one. Bad blood between Don King and Dan Duva, the two respective promoters. Those who've been in the fight game long as I have knows not even the Hatfields and McCoys had that much hatred as Don King and Dan Duva did. And they had genuine hatred. And it spun off to Don King and HBO. And when Don King's term with HBO was up, he was going to take his show to a rival network, which wound up happening. They had an original tentative agreement, at least so thought, from the Don King perspective for early 91. The Duvas basically didn't want to acknowledge it. And in the middle of all of that, Chavez was a promotional free agent at the end of 1990, and because he was mad at the time with Don King not getting a rematch with Meldrick Taylor, he tentatively agreed to a deal with Bob Arum and Top Rank. Then there was a supposed deal between a rematch with him and Taylor, originally set for May 18, 1991. That went down the tubes because a court hearing ruled that Don King keeps the rights to Julio Cesar Chavez. And when Don King went to Showtime, Chavez wound up going with him. Confusing, but it's boxing. I get it. So that's why that rematch didn't happen. And we know Don King and Dan Duva did not want to work with each other for the longest time because of that hatred. And of course, we know what happened to Meldrick Taylor after the first fight. He just got everything beaten out of him. I mean, the speech was messed up. The orbital bone was gone. All the blood that was lost. And even talk about taking a beating inside out. He took it. So they had the original tentative state of 91 never went through because of promotional conflicts. A verbal agreement was made in early of 1993 for a rematch, but Meldrick Taylor lost his welterweight title to Crisanto Espana, and that axed that. And at that point, main events and the Duvas simply pushed Meldrick Taylor aside. They basically left him in Ireland, or excuse me, in England, after Taylor lost to Espana, literally, and Taylor wound up going to Don King, got a modest 2.5 fight winning streak. 2-fight winning streak, I apologize. While that was going on, the Chavez downturn began with a draw to Whitaker and the loss to Frankie Randall. Of course, Chavez gets the win in the rematch under weird circumstances. And so we set up with St. Patrick's, with the rematch from St. Patrick's Day 1990, exactly 4.5 years later after the first fight. And it was every bit as good as the first fight. I'll give it that. The first fight of St. Patrick's Day 1990 was a case of whoever won was going to have the distinction of the best fighter pound for pound. And in this rematch, it was the opposite end of the spectrum. Whoever lost was more likely going to be out the door in terms of trying to get title shots or any kind of major money fights. Basically, it was almost a parallel of what we saw the first fight. We say styles make fights. That's what we got, and it happened again. Meldrick Taylor used this ring, used this speed to keep Chavez at bay and confuse Chavez, the hand speed, and for the first 2.5 rounds, he was in full control again. But halfway through the third round, a punch below the border, and Mills Lane deducts a point from Meldrick Taylor. And from that point forward, Chavez, just like the end of the first fight, started to show some confidence, started to pick up steam, landed that right hand with more frequency as the fights went on. But still, Meldrick Taylor, using his speed and ring generalship to stay away from Chavez, just like the first fight, was able to confuse him and was still winning the fight in control. Fast forward to round 6, another low blow by Meldrick Taylor. A second point was deducted, and basically Mills Lane told Meldrick Taylor to keep his punches up. But at that point forward, all the momentum changed again, and in round 6, they were going toe-to-toe, and 2 right hands by Chavez wobbled Meldrick Taylor, almost the same way he wobbled Meldrick Taylor in round 10 of their first fight. Same thing happened in round 6 of the second fight. And once again, just like in the first fight, the Meldrick Taylor's face became a bloody mask. The eyes were starting to puff. Not as bad as the first fight, but they were starting to. And of course, a cut on the lip. And what do we have here? Meldrick Taylor's Philadelphia heart finds a way to get in the way again as he's going toe-to-toe with Julio Cesar Chavez. What got him in trouble the first time, got him in trouble again. Except this time, there's not going to be any more controversy because Chavez made sure of it this time. Round 7, stepped up the pressure. Round 8, the 1-2, and then the double left hook sent Taylor down. Taylor gets up, and Chavez puts on a minor combination to where referee Mills Lane stops the fight. Mills Lane basically said, if Meldrick Taylor is going to be near that position again, I'm not going to let him get hurt. And that's why that fight was stopped. And Chavez, basically on his downturn, had his last great win. And that's what this was. Granted, Meldrick Taylor was a shot commodity at that point. We became more of a shot commodity because that was the end game for him. We talk about fights that rematches that take this long. But sometimes when they take this long on their downturn, they still show that flash of what their first fight was. This reminded me of what the second Leonard Hearns fight was in '89. Glimpses of what their first fight was, and that's what Chavez-Taylor II was. Had glimpses of what Chavez-Taylor I was. These two were certainly made for one another. Now, why did it take this long? This is a bad blood, rival networks, and that time it was nasty. It was nasty, a nasty rivalry, a nasty time. We talk about the HBO Showtime wars. For all you wrestling fans out there, this was boxing's version of what the Monday Night Wars was. HBO, Showtime, cross promoters, fighters jumping to other promoters, not happy with anything that's going on with the networks. Don King lit the fire when after the first Chavez-Taylor fight, saying, I'm taking my show to Showtime because he didn't like the way HBO conducted business in his eyes at the time, especially when it came to when he had both Chavez and Mike Tyson. And because of it, that's why he went to the other network, and that's why it took forever for this fight to materialize 4.5 years later. And there was no building up you need to do for this rematch after the first fight. This was 3 years past its expiration date, because after the first fight, Chavez-Taylor II was probably the most talked about fight outside of Holyfield Tyson. Everyone wanted to see the rematch given how the first fight ended. Everyone knew this. And Don King knew it. The Duvas knew it. HBO knew it. They wanted to try and get something done immediately. They couldn't. Of course, part of it also was revealed by the Duvas down the line when they had the Meldrick Taylor story every day month on HBO, was they wanted to try and rebuild his confidence after how demoralized Taylor was after losing to Chavez. Understandably so. It wasn't just physical. It was mental. Yet, at least in the mind of Meldrick Taylor, he supposedly had the fight won, and it was taken away with him with 2 seconds left. I get it. But that fight should have happened no later than the end of 1991, when it was still the most talked about fight outside of Holyfield Tyson when it comes to making fights, because that's what everyone wanted to see outside of the heavyweight division. Because Holyfield Tyson was the one everyone talked about. Of course, it didn't help that Tyson lost to Buster Douglas. Right behind it was a rematch between Julio Cesar Chavez and Meldrick Taylor, given the drama and the high skill of their first fight. The first fight was a case of high level. Second fight was a case of who declined worse. And we know Meldrick Taylor crashed and burnt, especially after taking 2 questionable fights against Terry Norris and Crisanto Espana in 1992, where he was just wiped off the face of the earth both times. And of course, this rematch basically came as shock out of nowhere, because nobody was talking about it at that point. It was talked about for the longest time. It was an early agreement for 1993, but Taylor lost to Crisanto Espana, and that was it. And nobody thought we was going to hear from Meldrick Taylor after the Espana loss, because he looked like the diminished skills inside the ring just caught up to him. Got on some modest 4-fight winning streak to get the rematch. And of course, Don King and of course the sale of what took place on St. Patrick's Day in 1990 was a way to build it. Of course, it built for the Mexican public, who still adored Chavez, although he was on his downturn. But a case of a rematch that came out of nowhere, which should have happened 3 years before it did, it was well after his expiration date. Still turned out to be a nice fight for both fighters, a decent financial bonanza. Probably the last decent financial bonanza for Meldrick Taylor, as he never came close to get to that point ever again. Forget about the first fight. He never got close to the rematch version of Meldrick Taylor, because we saw the legendary Nights documentary on the first fight, what became of Meldrick Taylor after the fight. The guy couldn't even put 2 words together. And after that documentary, one of the commissioners basically said, you're not fighting ever again, which I don't know how you let that guy fight, given the shape he was in after the second Chavez fight, which basically was the final nail in his coffin. And basically everyone said enough was enough. Now for Chavez, because of his name, he still got the big fights. Mainly the 2 of them against Oscar De La Hoya were just basically financial bonanzas. But he was done after this rematch. Got a couple of decent wins over guys like Giovanni Parisi and David Kamau. But in terms of financial bonanzas, his name was still going to get him, pay-per-view telecasts. But that was the end game for him. Even he said after he beat Hector Camacho in 92, it was basically it for him. But when you talk about fighters that were made for one another, Julio Cesar Chavez and Meldrick Taylor certainly were. I mean, that first fight was etched in history forever for many, many reasons. It checked all the boxes. Maybe this, we talk about the rematch, maybe one of the best fights that you don't talk about enough. I mean, no one talks about the rematch because everyone knows about the first fight. But that rematch, although it didn't have the high stature as the first fight because these two were on their downturn, had every bit the goods the first fight had. And it's probably not talked about because Chavez and Taylor were on their decline, obviously. More so Taylor because after what he took in the first fight. But they were as good as, it was about as good as the first fight, had glimpses of what the first fight was. Sort of like the rematch with Leonard Hearns 8 years after their first fight. I mean, it wasn't the high level that the first Leonard Hearns fight was, but the second one had glimpses of what that was, and both guys showed brilliance, flashes of brilliance in that rematch. And the same can be said for Chavez-Taylor and their rematch, who showed flashes of brilliance 4.5 years after their first fight. I mean, Larry Merchant said sometimes the rematches could be better than the first ones, simply because of, they've slowed down enough to where they can mix it up a little more. That was the case of both Leonard Hearns 2 and Chavez-Taylor 2. But maybe the Leonard Hearns rematch, because of everything that happened to Sugar Ray Leonard from the first to the second fight, maybe you could have seen that one coming. But when it came to Chavez-Taylor 2, no one saw this coming. Because after Taylor got obliterated by Terry Norris in 1992 in a fight that had made no sense taking place. I mean, it had no sense taking place. After he got beat down by Terry Norris and that tentative agreement with Chavez in 93, and then Taylor just got blasted by Crisanto Espana, we thought we were done with Meldrick Taylor. I mean, he had a moderate 3-fight winning streak, signed on with Don King. And King thought it was good enough to put the rematch together. I get it. Part of a good pay-per-view bonanza that had 4 title fights. But this one sort of came out of nowhere. We consider that what took place 4.5 years before, how that ended, and how much of a high-level fight that was when you talk about from the first fight to the second fight. We get a lot of this all the time with rematches. This is one that everybody should have demanded an immediate rematch for after their first fight in 1990. Should have gone past the end of 1991 at the latest, and that might have been pushing it. Because Chavez was out of opposition at that point. Pernell Whitaker was coming on, but that wasn't going to happen because of the promoters. Hector Camacho had that wild 2-fight series with Greg Haugen that basically took him out of the picture for a minute. Everything was there for Chavez-Taylor to happen, but because of the bad blood between the promoters, the bad blood between the rival networks, and of course, at least perception-wise, how main events protected Meldrick Taylor after the Chavez fight, and of course, his year in 92 where he was just absolutely bottomed out. This rematch came out of nowhere, and maybe didn't have the sizzle that the first fight did, but because it was past its expiration date, that's probably why it lacked it. But still, it turned out to be a good fight, a good financial bonanza for the pay-per-view for all the fighters that fought on that Don King card. And I talk about all the time, when we talk about the pay-per-views, Don King knew how to put it together. Everybody talks about all these pay-per-view cards today. Yeah, I had seen what Don King put together. I mean, these Don King pay-per-view cards are basically the equivalent of going to an ATM, drawing up $20, giving it to your give it to your cable company, and tell them turn this pay-per-view on. That was what Don King pay-per-views were, and this was one of them. It turned out to be a pretty darn good bonanza. But as I said, in terms of the rematch, it was nice to see both fighters show flashes of brilliance and relive flashes of what took place 4.5 years before. But it was at least 3 years after his expiration date. Because this came out of nowhere. Even yours truly, one of them. When I first heard this rematch took place, I was stunned. Because this one should have happened after the controversial cloud that took place St. Patrick's Day 1990. We know what happened there. Should have been at least the end of 1990. The opportunity was there. But all kinds of wild stuff with the fighters and promoters and networks reared its ugly head. And we say all the time, when the business aspect of boxing gets in the way, it ruins everything. That's why everything got pushed back for the longest time. And when there was one tentative agreement in 93 that took place, Meldrick Taylor's championship skill level plummeted when he got obliterated by Crisanto Espana. Larry Merchant brought that up before the fight. If you guys want a resource on that, it's on one of the YouTubes. It was on the undercard of Lennox Lewis versus Razor Ruddock. Larry Merchant said, basically, agreement was made between Taylor and Chavez. If Taylor gets by Espana, he didn't get by Espana, and that was it. But it did happen in 1994 after its expiration date. Is it how the sport goes when it comes to some of these rematches? We get them after expiration dates. If you're talking about a financial bonanza, as it is, you're talking about that kind of a financial bonanza. I mean, if you think, if they say let it cook, but sometimes if you overcook, it's basically you're not going to get a good meal out of it. Luckily, you still had some kind of a good meal out of this rematch, but because of everything that took place 4.5 years before, everything that built up, the high drama and everything, which is basically the fight of the year and the fight of the 90s decades, the first fight between Chavez and Taylor, makes you wonder why no rematch took place when they talk about this particular two-fight series. Too far apart between top of 4.5 years, because a lot happened in and out of the ring with both fighters, and in the business aspect of boxing, a lot happened. And it was just crazy. It's out there for you guys to read. Yes, I agree with everyone that said it should have happened probably no later than later at the end of 91, because we're still built up for that. They both were calling for the fight. One thing people forget, as much as Taylor wanted the rematch, so did Chavez. He said as many times as possible, I want it as soon as possible to show the whole world that what happened in 1990 was no fluke. But the business aspect got in the way when it came to Don King, Bob Arum, and Dan Duva. And because they wanted to get in the way, it took 4.5 years for it to happen. And by the time it happened, it was a stunner that it happened, and it was after its expiration date. The business of boxing, as we know, is the business of boxing. Crazy. I could have a show about the business of boxing to educate some of these idiots out here who think they know it. Because the stuff you guys talk about, it was there in the 90s. There in the 80s. It was not as talked about now because we have more information in the technology wave of the 21st century as we have it today. Because if we had this back then at the Chavez-Taylor fiasco, this thing would have been all over the place. And there would have been high demands to where the internet probably would have been forced to shut down for a demand of a rematch. That's how demanding the fight public was for a rematch between these two, the most talked about fight outside of Holyfield Tyson in 1990, after their first fight happened. Took them 4.5 years. A lot of reasons for it, but we know the business side of boxing rears its ugly head. If people are asking about Meldrick Taylor, why he's not in the Hall of Fame, put me in that boat. The guy he beat, Buddy McGirt, is in the Hall of Fame, and McGirt and Taylor basically had the same accomplishments. But Meldrick Taylor was a gold medalist, and his first world title win came against Buddy McGirt. Why holding that against him from not going to the Hall of Fame? Grant, as I said before, boxing has a weird criteria for the Hall of Fame than, say, football or basketball, especially the NFL and pro basketball Hall of Fames. I get it. It's a different criteria. It's weird. And it's a bit of a lower bar. But it shows this weird, ugly head and inconsistencies when you have something like this happen, because it's not a slight of Buddy McGirt, who's a valid Hall of Famer. I mean, he's a great fighter, but also a great trainer also. And he trained Antonio Tarver to shock Roy Jones. And so that tells you how great as a trainer and Buddy McGirt was. But how are you going to put a guy in the Hall of Fame with Buddy McGirt, who deserves it, but the guy that beat him and has a more significant accomplishment in winning the gold medal in the 84 Olympics, in Meldrick Taylor, leave him out? That's a question that people needs to answer. Yes, I get it. Taylor had probably a worse downturn than Buddy McGirt. I got it. But doesn't deter the fact the guy, when he was on the come up, was one of the more, we talk about just pure talent and flash. Meldrick Taylor was it, especially when he beat Buddy McGirt the first time. It's time for everyone out there in the boxing community to give this guy his due and put him in the Hall of Fame, because, I mean, if you're gonna have this kind of a standard, he surpasses the standard and he checks the boxes. He belongs. The only downfall for Meldrick Taylor was he wanted to be Sugar Ray Leonard and Joe Frazier in the same sentence. That's what cost him the first fight against Chavez. That's what cost him against Crisanto Espana. And that's what cost him in the second fight against Chavez. You can't be Sugar Ray Leonard and Joe Frazier in the same sentence. That's remotely impossible. You're basically begging yourself to get knocked out. And when that Philadelphia heart got in Meldrick Taylor's way, that was all she wrote in the big fights. I'm not going to talk about the Terry Norris fight because that had no business taking place. Whoever's idea to put Taylor and Norris together needed to be checked for CTE because that was just an embarrassment. That had no business taking place. Someone explained to me whose idea was to put him in there. His biggest lockout was Terry Norris' weight cut to 151 of the contracted weight. But still, Meldrick Taylor was so shot at that point that I'm surprised worse wasn't done to Meldrick Taylor that night. But Meldrick Taylor, before all of this, was a thing of beauty. You know, he was certainly special. You could argue he should have had the win against Chavez. I'm not even going to debate that. I'll talk about that on another show. But he was special. And in terms of what he's done up to that, the first 24 fights, going into the Chavez fight, that's Hall of Fame worthy. And we consider he won a title from a guy who's in the Hall of Fame right now and has as much accomplishments as a guy in the Hall of Fame. And given how the standard is now, when you put guys like Vinny Pazienza and Arturo Gatti in the Hall of Fame, this guy belongs. It's time to get him in. Plain and simple. I could talk about Hall of Famers all I want in Hall of Fame processes. All sports have their own criteria. I get it. I mean, I'm not going to say I know it all. I don't. I get it. It is what it is. But when you have something like this, especially in the sport of boxing, when the criteria is low and the bar is low, considering the standards and the criteria, and you check the boxes the way Meldrick Taylor does, it's time to put him in. It's time. I got to talk about this summer. I'll talk about this summer down the line because next year is going to be the Hall of Fame ballot, and there's going to be sparks all over the place again in the fight community. That's why I don't vote. And on that note, I will wrap up this edition of Sir Hunt on X. Shout out Brenda Baker. Shout out Howard Gaddis. Glad to see you two pop in here. Hope you two are doing good. Hope you guys have yourselves a wonderful rest of the 17th of September 2025. No show until after the weekend. Those who follow me on the X platform, I will have 2 NFL shows on tomorrow and Friday. I will discuss more of what's going on with the injury situation with Joe Burrow in Cincinnati, and it's still an eyebrow raiser with the comments of Zac Taylor. I will touch on those tomorrow night and Friday night. Anybody who misses this show or anything else I've done in the past, you can catch it live on the Apple Podcasts, the iHeartRadio, and the Spotify apps, as audio versions will be on those, and the video version will be live on Spotify. Also, for those of you in Cincinnati, I will be live October 16th from Cincinnati to do an in-game preview of the Steelers and the Bengals. Granted, Joe Burrow's not there, but I've committed to it, and I will honor it. I will be along the banks in Cincinnati to do a live pregame show before the game. You're more than welcome to check me out. And as always, make self-care your number one priority in all walks of life. If you take care of yourself first, all the good things come your way. It's all matters. Take care of you, focus on you, and good things will follow. If you don't take care of yourself first, nothing else matters, because it's all about taking care of yourself first. That's why I tell everyone, stay true to yourself, stay on the straight and narrow. Good things will come your way if you do the right things. I had to learn that the hard way myself. On that note, let's enjoy the rest of the night. Take care of yourselves. God bless. And to all 32, the fans of all 32 teams in the NFL, good luck tomorrow night and Sunday. I will be back after the weekend. So at that point, have a good night. God bless and enjoy the evening.